Pick up your nearest joint, maybe a bong, maybe you're going to do some dabs, but it's time to jump into rotation.
Dabs, yo.
Well, shout out to all of our viewers and listeners out there. Glad everyone is hopefully having a good Sunday. Happy Veterans Day that we just had to all those who have served the armed forces of the United States. As we move forward, there's been a lot of great news recently. Folks are all excited about Ohio becoming the latest state to legalize the adult use of cannabis. So shout out to the Buckeye State for, trying to move it forward. We still got half the country to get done, and there's a big gap in legalization in the South. The Florida Supreme Court this week just heard arguments, and if you watch the videos, we just sent out an email. If you're on our email list, you can go back and watch the hearing. It seems like the Supreme Court justices weren't buying the state's arguments about striking it off the ballot. So it still remains to be seen whether or not Florida will be the first state in the South to essentially legalize adult use. Of course, Virginia did, but Virginia has had some back and forth politically. On election night, the Democrats took back control of the Virginia legislature, so hopefully we'll see some adult use sales coming out of Virginia soon. But all in all, as we move forward, I think it's important that we take a moment to just reflect on the journey that it's taken to get to this point, the amount of blood, sweat, and tears, and the fact that this hasn't happened in a vacuum, that all the progress that has been made is because there have been hundreds, if not thousands and tens of thousands of individuals, just like each and every one of you listening and watching, that have rolled up your sleeves and contributed some way into moving this forward. Whether it's been your own personal experience with the criminal justice system, or it's been your desire to help a sick relative gain access to a life-saving medicine, or it's just been the fact that you see injustice and you don't think it's right that people lose their jobs, lose their apartments, lose their kids, and even lose their lives and freedom over a plant that, frankly, for those who believe, God put on this earth for us to utilize. And for those who are non-believers, obviously, your own sense of moral and social justice doesn't make sense to put people in jail and destroy their lives for nonviolent crimes, which don't harm anybody. And so that's the crux of where we are today. Some folks have an elation of progress. Other folks are still, pessimistic about where we're going. And so I think it's important that we continue to examine and look at the journey. And I think that there is no one better who to really talk about that journey than our special guest today, because he's a friend of the show, has been on numerous times, and we're proud to have him. And that is Macolm Mackinnon, a world famous photographer, a former editor in chief of High Times. Macolm, welcome.
Thank you. Okay. Good to be back. That's third time, man. Third time with you guys. I really appreciate it. I appreciate.
Yeah, you did the Platt Shorn show. The Platt Shorn
yeah. No, but I really appreciate what you said about as I was telling you guys before the show, it was kind of by accident. I never expected a 25-year career with High Times. When I started off, I basically was a photographer who wanted to see my photos in print. But I evolved over the years, and I became a hardcore activist and became a fairly good spokesperson for the new industry, which I have some problems with. But as we all do. So it's been a real journey. Thanks.
Well, you have done something unique in capturing this journey in photos, which will outlive all of us. And I think that it's just amazing, the work that you've done. I mean, I've seen some of your work, with models, and I've seen some of your work just photographing bud itself, and it truly is art. Sometimes it almost bring you to tears of how beautiful it is. So.
Yeah. Thanks. I really appreciate it. I started off at High Times just watching people shoot buds. And, as a photographer, and somebody who really loves shooting people, I always wanted to do more with the plant than just shoot buds. So, I set up, different kinds of tableaus, put pot in different kind of situations. I always tried to thematize, what I was shooting. And certainly I used an awful lot of, models in my work as well. because I think, when you see somebody who's normal looking person who's enjoying cannabis, it helps other people get around the fact that, geez, this stuff is harmful, but when you see a pretty girl or a responsible looking person smoking pot or working with it, yeah, it makes a difference. So
you don't just take pictures of models, though. Like, you've taken pictures of celebrities and whatnot, like
well, in my book, which
Song and
here it is right here, which is going to be released on November 14th, with this next Wednesday. There it is right there, everyone. Yeah, I have a number of different chapters. I have chapters on marijuana models. I have glorious gardens, beauty in the buds, but also I have a tremendous amount of respect for the icons of the cannabis movement and the leaders. And there are two separate chapters. The icons, I'll name them, in my opinion: Jack Herer, Dennis Perone, Tommy Chong, and Dr. Lester Grinspoon. I don't think anybody can come close to their contributions in the war for cannabis freedom. And as far as the leaders, it's a long chapter. All the people I've met, all the wonderful people who were inspired by the people I just mentioned, from Chris Conrad, the late Robert Melamede, the late Dr. Raphael Mechoulam. All of these people. I mean, I feel like Forrest Gump, like every single moment in marijuana history, I was there to photograph the people. And
a revelation just kind of went off in my head. Like, I don't know if that's the right term, but you said that you started working for High Times in '92.
Yeah, well, I actually shot my first photo in 1989. Peter Gorman, who died last year, was a senior editor with High Times, and we were very, very good friends long before he worked for High Times. And as I became a better and better photographer, he recommended me for my first assignments. He had just returned from India with Bang Candy, which is a cannabis edible. It's called Rocket Munaka, and that was my first photo I shot for High Times in October 1989. And then Peter and I did some more stories together in '91, and by '92 I had been hired as photo editor. So
you're a photo editor in '92, and a lot of people like the revelation went off in my head when you mentioned Dennis Perone. Like, a lot of people may not know who Dennis Perone is. Dennis Perone opened the Cannabis Buyers Club in San Francisco.
Disco Buyers,
and we always contribute the legalization of medical cannabis to 1996 in California, but he opened his Cannabis Buyers Club in '92.
That's
so
correct.
you were like there from the beginning of the U.S. cannabis.
No, I visited the Cannabis Buyers Club in San Francisco when it opened, when Dennis was running it, and what a wonderful place it was. It was the most welcoming place. Beautiful, fabrics all over the walls. It was nice and spacious. It was in kind of a shady area of town, but Dennis was always there. He was always there. Giving people hope, making friends with people. Dennis was a very, very brave, courageous man. I mean, he saw. The fact is, the marijuana movement owes a huge debt of gratitude to the gay rights movement. They were the ones who recognized the medical benefits of cannabis for people who were suffering from wasting syndrome, from AIDS. And he was the one who spearheaded those movements to make it legal, where people with AIDS and other people with medical conditions could access marijuana. He's rightly considered the father of medical marijuana.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was his partner that contracted HIV, and they realized that. And that's why it was called the Cannabis Buyers Club. All the AIDS Buyers Club, all the medicine in the AIDS Buyers Club was not helping as much as smoking joints.
Exactly. His name escapes me off the top of his head, but that was he spoke very, very personally about the problem his partner was having, battling AIDS. And I wish I could remember his name off the top of my head, but yeah, that's what motivated him to do this. And he was fearless. I mean, he knew California politics. He wasn't afraid. And man, he went through some major changes once he did this.
I mean, he worked with Harvey Milk. His partner Jonathan West, of course, was his motivation.
What was the woman, the lady that made edibles for the cannabis?
Brownie Mary. Yeah, she passed away in the '90s. but she was hardcore. I mean, she had no fear of the police, no fear of being cracked down upon. She was arrested. She kept going along. She's one of the legends. A lot of the people, that are in my book are people who are the younger generation are not going to recognize. The people who really, the new industry stands on the shoulders of these people.
Mhm.
And I've heard a number of people, not a lot, but I've heard of several people say, that they discount the danger of the era of illegalization and the danger of being raided upon. They minimize it. They won't recognize the fact that the OGs are the ones who made this industry, and they don't want to hear from, not necessarily me because I'm a journalist, but they don't want to hear from the people who started the industry. They want to just keep making their money. I don't think they care as much about the people in jail. I mean, there are a lot of them still in jail, by the way, and they're still being arrested. So, the industry, I don't think, has really shown that it has got its heart in the right place at this point.
Now, the case in Atlanta right now with her former president is a RICO case. And what is interesting is that a lot of the people who are currently still in jail for cannabis possession, cannabis cultivation, were all involved in RICO cases that they trumped up as RICO cases in order to do so. And a lot of them got life sentences.
Yeah. No, it's been a tragedy what's been going on. And it continues to go on. I mean, like we said before the show, 25 states have now legalized. Great, glad to hear it. What about the other 25? And it's dangerous. We talk about Colorado. This it's a powerhouse of cannabis legalization. But look at the two states that border them, Nebraska and Kansas. You go over the border with a Colorado license plate, they're going to check you out. This country is still screwed how people deal with marijuana. And I call it marijuana. I call it pot.
Yeah, Gary, marijuana.
Yeah, I'm tired of people saying we must call it cannabis. We must no.
Before we move on, real quick,
I'm with you, Malcolm.
I do want to highlight. Dennis Perone was a United States Air Force veteran.
That's right.
He served during Vietnam during the Tet Offensive. So this guy was fearless. There was nothing that could scare him, and that is something that the new generation really lacks. Growing up in peacetime, a lot of the new leaders in the industry are soft. They don't have the experience of those folks who came out of the Vietnam era, who really trailblazed in the early 90s.
I also mentioned Jack Hare is a veteran as well, or was a veteran, I should say. I'm not sure whether Dr. Grinspoon was. Tommy's a Canadian citizen, was not. But these people, they're Americans, and they were tough Americans. Seriously, Dennis and Jack was funny to watch them together because Jack, I think, was a little bit jealous of Dennis, and Dennis didn't care. Dennis wanted, Jack wanted a lot of attention for himself, and that's kind of the way he was because he deserved it. But he was all amazed when Dennis Perone, kind of like started stealing his thunder. So it was fun to watch them together. But Jack, he recognized Dennis and what a great man he was.
Yeah.
But I got to know all these people, fairly well. Jack, I spent a number of times with him, shot him a number of times, stayed at his house, watched his life beyond activism, which was completely wild. I mean, if you're ever in his house, it was like a zoo. It was Grand Central Station. There were so many people coming through, and he's selling pot at the same time. So it was wild. Dennis was a little bit more organized. Had a wonderful house in San Francisco. It was a center of political action. And so, so I got to photograph Dennis when they put him on the cover of High Times after his death. And it was my photo. I was really pleased with that.
Of everybody that you've, at least associated with, not just photographed, but associated with your career with High Times, right? Was there ever somebody that you just got like the butterflies when you met them? Like you just got mad nervous?
It was mostly celebrities. Most of the celebrities, for example, Merle Haggard. I sat down with him at his home in California when he was on the cover of Hemp Times. I was also the executive editor of Hemp Times, which ran from 1996 to 1999. So he was on the cover, and he was a wonderful guy, but very, very gruff. And he intimidated me. And the funny thing is, he was talking about hemp, and he said, "No, I'm telling you right now, I'm talking about hemp here. I ain't talking about marijuana. I don't want you talking about marijuana in this article." I said, no problem. I know this is Hemp Times. He pulls out his pipe, fills it with pot, and starts smoking. And then the funniest part is, he's sitting there and he's smoking and like that. And he puts the pipe, and I thought he was passing it to me. So it was like one of these things. Oh, sorry. I almost took Merle Haggard's pipe, so it was almost embarrassing.
Did he like start smoking pot and then start like talking shit about it? He's like, yeah, that marijuana really poisoning the streets.
He just, back then, this was 1997. He wanted to keep the two issues separate. And that was the goal of Hemp Times, too, which I think, looking back on it, was very, very poor policy, because who's buying hemp? Stoners, so keeping the stoners out of Hemp Times, I don't think was a great business decision. But in the spirit of that, we really did try to keep it separate. And he said, he only wanted to be in Hemp Times because, hey, listen, back then, country music, smoking pot, it's a family affair, country music. You're going from, state fair to the, county fair to this, and you're performing. And these are Bible thumping, God-fearing people, and marijuana is no good. So they didn't want most country singers did not want any association with pot. That was the way it kind of went. Yeah.
Wow.
Except for people like, I'm trying to think with Willie.
Yeah,
of course.
Willie Nelson is the only one that like really comes to mind.
You though. Yeah. I only photographed Willie once, and it was a bad shot. He was at an outdoor concert, and I got up close, but it's not in the book. But really, I'm so proud of this book, and Pot Shots: The Journey of a High Times Photographer, and it is it's an historical document. It's an art book, if you will. It's a coffee table book. And there's over 300 photos of marijuana and the people who have been instrumental in making it legal. So, I encourage everybody to check it out.
About 12 of your, how many photos was it? It's like 12 of your hundreds of photos here.
There's stories behind every one of these shots.
So I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to start from the top, if that's okay with everybody, and just kind of go through the line.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Right here.
Okay, this was taken in Michigan. Those are two glass pipes. One is the Detroit Tigers logo. The other is University of Michigan Wolverines. I took this right on the banks of the Huron River. Third Coast Cannabis in Ypsilanti, Michigan, provided the pot. And just, I always love this shot. I mean, just, it's Michigan. That's all there is to it.
Pure Michigan.
Just a plate of weed by a river. I love it.
Yeah. This one, I took up in the Hollywood Hills, and I had to get close enough to the Hollywood sign. I was using a wide-angle lens, and so I had to get, going up further and further just to get this shot. And we had LAPD helicopters fly over us 3 times. The third time it came over, they just hovered over us trying to figure out what we were doing. So I put my reflector over the pot, and then acted like my assistant was a model, and I said, take your shirt off. I'll act like you're, doing a model shoot. And so we did that. And so they hovered, and they finally took off. And then we just said, they're not going to land on this kind of terrain, but still, I mean, we're just people who live in those high-priced palaces on the hillside. They were a little bit worried about what the hell was going on.
Yeah,
there.
I see the date there. It says 97, so it's it was not a medical legalizing.
All you do is tell them that you were taking some bud porn.
By the way, Gary asked me to take my shirt off all the time, and it makes me very uncomfortable.
This is the literally the highest pot shot in America. This was taken above Alma, Colorado. Alma is the highest incorporated city in the United States at about 11,000 feet. I took this at around 13,000 feet. Mark January, who runs high country healing in Alma, took me way up high up into the mountains. We shot this in July. That's a bristlecone tree in the background. Those trees can 2,000 years old. So I thought that was kind of nice. Put those two together. Very, very rugged plant that can last 2,000 years. And you got cannabis in the foreground.
You got some nice diagonal lines on that shot too. I like the composition.
You know what I have to ask you, Malcolm? How high were you when you took this shot?
The funny thing is about when I was concentrating on photography, smoking just I don't know. You've probably noticed when you're really concentrating on something, you don't get really that high. So I'd become very, very lucid and straight if I was smoking. It didn't matter. So a lot of times I just didn't bother smoking when I was shooting because it's not enjoyable. You're concentrating on other things. You're not enjoying the feeling of being high. So yeah, I mean, I didn't really shoot I didn't, and I was okay. Got to smoke up before I do
I,
photographs.
I think Carlos is getting the fact that does altitude change your euphoria? I mean, were you high or were you? High?
I'm literally looking for like how many miles above sea level where it was that shot. Like how high were you?
About a good 2.5 miles above sea level. And the fact is, when and by the way, when you are at that level, you do get much higher because I have smoked at that.
Isn't that incredible though? Like you talk about your process, of photography and how marijuana really doesn't play a big. But I got to be honest with you, I smoke to concentrate, man. I would definitely be the type of person that's like, oh, let me smoke this bowl before I start taking these pictures.
Yeah, Carlos is the high point of Ybor City, I think.
Well, when I was writing, I'd have a joint, and I'd have my laptop, and then I'd forget about it, because you're concentrating on the writing. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of how I work. I mean, I smoke a lot. I mean, don't get me wrong, but when it comes to work, I just didn't really find it all that helpful. Didn't find it unhelpful either. It just was, nothing for me.
Next, I got the cover.
Sure. Yes, this is the cover of the Hot Shots. There you see it. This was taken in Montana, way out in the backcountry, and there was a rotting fence post, and it was just a spur of the moment type thing. And I said, let me try this, and this is really, it became the cover of the
great
book.
Shot for a cover.
Yeah, really was spectacular. This was taken up in Humboldt County on Black Sands Beach. Where it really is black sand there, and that's all from a local grower. I always tried to find nice platters to put my buds on. Something really looks But as I say, I'm trying to thematize what I do. I always try to put the pot in, not just like pot. I wanted to put it next to an ocean, in the mountains. I always wanted to do something with it. Yeah,
it looks like almost like an Afghani bud there.
Well, this is this was B.E. Smith's garden, and I always like to shoot into the sun, and 95% of the shots don't work, but this one did. I got lucky, and I wasn't even using a filter for this starburst either. This was just plain luck. And B.E. There's probably Tragic, which was Tragic. It was a combination of gooey and plane wreck, I think.
How do you remember? Like that's.
Well, I remember what B. All right, I think this is a little bit out of order, but this shot was taken at the center of the United States. It's in Belfort, South Dakota. That's where the geographic center of the United States is, right there. Okay. See, right? This is where it is. It's out on the prairie, and so this is the center of the nation. Big tourist trap, obviously. So there's a little, medallion right here. And so I put a bowl right next to it. Now, just for all of you geographic and history majors out there, the original, before Hawaii and Alaska were added to the made 50 states, the center of the U.S. used to be in Kansas, but for some reason now it's in South Dakota because of the addition of Hawaii and Alaska. I'm not sure how that works, but this is what the United States designated as the center of the nation.
Yeah, I don't know how that works either.
This is your tax dollars at work.
This is in Rhode Island. When Rhode Island was, just starting its medical marijuana program, growers there, Dana Johnson, who became a great contact in Rhode Island, we went out to Newport and laid down on the marina, and I put about 3 or 4 different strains in a crevice of the dock, and this led the feature about Rhode Island. So it was. High Tide in Rhode Island. That was the name of the feature I wrote.
Nice.
Yeah. This was taken also near Alma. This was taken in July in the Rocky Mountain Meadow, and there are about 8 different strains in this photo. Once again, Mark January, good friend, who all helped me out, provided the buds for this shot. I took quite a few in the mountains with the help of Mark January. I see a nice. Thank you, Rory Gould. Malcolm, this is great. Hope all is well. Hoping, and you mentioned Ed. Ed Rosenthal is in my book. He gets top billing. Ed is the. I say if there were a Growers Hall of Fame, he'd be the first inductee.
I'm kind of a big fan of Ed Rosenthal.
Yeah,
For you
and
Michiganders, Arborside. That's Rory's place.
And Carlos, didn't you study under Ed when you went to Oxford?
I mean, I wouldn't say anything formally. I snuck into a lecture he was holding.
no,
But
Ed,
it was honestly like that's the thing. It's like marijuana kind of clicked everything. There was a big mystery to like why I liked marijuana so much, and the way Ed just put it down, just it was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's why I like it so much. That's why it's so great.
Ed, has become, I think, more and more influential as time has gone on. I used to be his editor in the early '90s, and worked with him quite a bit. And he can be a mercurial guy.
Yeah, he seems like he can be grumpy.
Yeah, he can be a little bit grumpy, but he can be very, very funny at the same time. I remember when Jack Hare, on the back of his book, it said, "If you prove me wrong on any of these points, you win $10,000." And so there are some of the numbers in his book about what hemp can do and what it can produce or whatever. Ed took him to task, and Jack was so upset about it. I said, yes, I said, Jack, he's just causing trouble, man. It's just, he knew he could get to Jack, and Jack was upset about it. I had to remind Jack, I said, Jack, you're on the cover of High Times, not Ed. Okay, it's the biggest selling.
Shit.
It was the biggest selling issue of the '90s up until that point when Jack hit the cover, and so I had to remind him of that. I said, what are you complaining? So yeah, I guess he is okay. I'm okay. That was Jack.
I found this picture you have of Jack where he's holding a watch. It seems to be popping up all over the place lately. I have a feeling you're not getting royalties for that.
Yeah. Thank you, Gary, for mentioning that. This is kind of like the bane of photographers: people stealing the shots and using them for their own use. I mean, it's annoying to the extreme. For example, for a long time there was a mural that was an exact replica of my photo out in Venice Beach, California. Now, I don't mind people using it, but at least give me a credit, And so that it is annoying. But when people use it for commercial use, then it's not fair. I mean, because people are paying for the usage of my photos, and any photographer will tell you this. It's theft. And if you notice this very, very closely, I mean, took a few shots of Jack here. It's 421, not 420. So, just trying to get Jack in the right position. He was a model to work with.
We had
time dilation is a thing, I suppose.
We had his son on once, and I asked his son on the show what it was like to get high with his dad, and he said it was just like hanging out with him. He was just always getting high.
Which son was it? Was it Mark or Dan?
Dan.
Yeah, Mark had a very, very successful head shop in Oregon for years. He was very, very involved in the industry. Dan was a latecomer. He kind of took over and late in Jack's life and started, started the original Jack Hare brand, and now he's running the Jack Hare Cup, which is coming up in Las Vegas in just a couple weeks. Nice. So Dan's very, very involved in cannabis now, so he's kind of trying to carry on the legacy.
Yeah, it is a great show. But I'd like to ask you the same question. What was it like to get high with Jack?
Well, he was always smoking, so I remember before one cannabis cup, he came to New York, and he was staying over a couple days, and so he was in the back room where we smoked, and he was smoking everything. Him and Soma was there too. The seed breeder. Yeah. And I remember rolling up a couple joints, and I turned my head and they were gone. I go, what the hell? And Jack just kind of looks at me and goes, he'd taken them just for later. He's kind of looking at him like, you can't, Jack, give them back. I go, all right, Jack, take them. That's the thing. He got a lot of free pot in his life.
All right, these look like ambulance photos.
Oh, this is
okay.
Guess the grower had his crop growing drying in his greenhouse, and all of a sudden rumors of a raid came to him. So he decided to let me put all the pot in the back of a horse trailer. So much for keeping your pot contaminant free.
Oh, it's all fertilizer, right?
Yeah. Now this is a guy in Colorado who really took medical marijuana literally. He got a used ambulance and set up a grow room in the back of it. So really something. You know, this was in Black Hawk, Colorado. Thus, all the nice trees everywhere around. Yeah. So, I mean, listen, what people allowed me to do with their plants. I mean, if you look at the book, I have a shot of a kitten on top of a pile of pot. Now, the cat wasn't sleeping there. I put it on top 3 or 4 times, and the grower let me do that. I'm like, I don't know if that would happen these days, but it certainly let me back then. So I got all kinds of shots in
Catnip
here.
spray would have helped.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, it's now it's even better. Got to mention Ed Rosenthal. Well, thank you, Rory. I just did. All right. Listen to the show. Rory Gould, who runs Arborside at Michigan.
He wrote that comment 6 minutes ago. Yeah. Don't worry about it.
Okay. No, he's got a great dispensary there. I photographed his dispensary and his bud tenders. Chuck Ream was there. So I've gotten to know a lot of the activists. You know, as I said, I was lucky enough to be in so many different places, so many different times. I traveled nearly 1 million miles in pursuit of stories. I have an archive of photos that's unmatched. And so that's why I put the book together. I mean, it took a while. I mean, I got a lot of requests for it, and it was a real slog doing it. And I always think about that show from the 90s called The Real West, which was a documentary series about the myths and legends of the Old West. And it starts off in the past that is now gone forever. And that's kind of how I feel about marijuana, the things that we knew about, all that kind of activism and that camaraderie that we had, this underground outlaw kind of feeling in the community. It's gone. You know, so that's kind of like what this book represents, is that past, and tells people, what the real story was like back then.
Well, the leaders of the industry right now are not so much activists as they are chads.
Yeah.
No, it's true. I mean, I have, so many people who are supposed leaders of the industry I've never heard of. You know, that's the wild thing. Also, I also love the people who call themselves pioneers. You know, like, really, you're pioneer, huh? And you've been in the business since 2017.
Tell us more about your extensive experience.
Or people who label themselves master growers. You know, where did that come from? A master grower? You've been growing for 1.5 years and you are now a master grower? Seriously. So there, I mean, there a lot of people have, tried to really inflate their history.
I graduated from USF in 2011. And I had wanted to go into the cannabis industry right away. I ended up going to grad school, but I remember, I remember at the time it was like, why a lot of people were like, why would you want to get into the cannabis industry? It's like a rite of passage that you have to go to jail for a little while in order to like be taken seriously. And
well, yeah. No, I remember, even with High Times, a lot of us wondered, is this the end of the line in journalism for us at that time? Because High Times was, it's like akin to porn to a lot of people. So, working for High Times. Oh, you worked for High Times? Really?
It's a lot of respect deserves to be thrown your way, because, I mean, it just the fact that you were taking pictures of cannabis, it wasn't something that photographers really were doing at the time.
I'll tell you, it was hard getting good buds a lot of time for the magazine. We're trying to shoot a centerfold. You had to look hard. Buds. It was not easy in New York City. I mean, finding great buds. It really wasn't. And like I say, a lot of growers did not want the attention of High Times in any way whatsoever. They didn't even want you coming to the house. Yeah. They were afraid that the house was being watched. And believe me, there were a few instances in the history of High Times where that did happen, where people were followed. People were busted in the wake of a visit by a High Times journalist. Wow. That did happen.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was at a festival this last weekend, and it was like a giant trapper market. and I kept on wondering, there are police outside this venue that are just doing traffic, but are they really just doing traffic?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, our first Cannabis Cup in LA, which I think was 2012. We were very, very strict rules. You had to have a cannabis medical card. And, we had undercover cops trying to get in, and we could see who the undercover cops were. They were being dropped off, right in front of the building, and the car would just take off, and the guys looked like cops, completely, just immediately. So we were stopping all these guys, and we wouldn't let them into the smoking section. So we had to be very, very vigilant. The funny thing is, the next year, they didn't, LA would not let us have the Cannabis Cup there. We had to go to San Bernardino because they couldn't believe that this had happened, that there had been a Cannabis Cup that nobody seemed to know about. That High Times did this right in the middle of downtown LA. There's this park, it's LA City Center, and it was wonderful. It was a great, great event. It really, truly was. But we weren't allowed to do it the next year. That's for sure.
Well, Malcolm, you brought up a good point about, High Times being treated like porn. I've been to, certain places where you buy it, and yeah, it's behind the counter with a cover next to the porno mags. It's like, right. Wow.
Well, that was what people thought of it. I mean, people were, raging against it. Remember, Ronald Reagan in the 80s said, marijuana is the biggest number one threat to, to youth in America, and it's completely crazy things, and George Bush, Senior, he was an avid drug warrior. Clinton was no better. Don't ever think that just because he was a Democrat that he was any better. He let things go on, and even in Obama's first few years, the rest were higher than they had been with the second Bush. In the first year, there were more arrests for pot. So this is, and then also when in the first year of his presidency, Obama, when he was asked about marijuana and legalization, he just laughed it off like it was a joke. Oh, yeah, right. We're going to legalize. But, it was during one of these town hall meetings. And he just completely dismissed it. Like, we're not going to talk about it. And now here 10 years later, or how many years later since Obama?
15.
Yeah. Look at us now.
It's gotta be frustrating though with corporate cannabis and everything. I gotta be honest with you guys. I'm walking around saying that like mushrooms and MDMA seem to have an easier tract on getting legalized than cannabis nationally.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I don't think most people are even aware of what's going on as far as those issues are concerned. I think once people are really apprised of it, I think you might see some kind of uproar. It might become a very sticky political issue.
My issue is that it seems like corporate cannabis has its hands on the industry so tightly that I mean, if we do see legalization, I think they're happy making the money where they're at now. But if we do see legalization, we're not going to see things like home grows. We're not going to see a lot of rights that we deserve.
The free schedule thing is not so much an offer as a threat.
Yeah. Right.
Well, the quality.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the quality of bud. I mean, you see what they put out of these corporate-run dispensaries, these multi-state operators. It's nothing compared to the beautiful stuff that you shoot.
No, it's not. Yeah. And listen, like I say, I'm still, pot's legal here in New York. You can go to dispensaries and stuff, but the black market is alive and well. And that's still where I get my pot because it is better. It is some of the best stuff that I'm getting right now. Is some of the best stuff I've had in my life.
Is there any fungi pictures in the book?
Any what guy pictures?
Any fungi pictures in the book?
No. Well, actually, there is one. I shot a 23-pound bale, and in order to give it some scale, so it just didn't look like a brick, just a tiny brick, we put some mushrooms on that. So yes, there are some mushrooms that adorn that particular.
They're not as pretty as bud. I'm sorry, but the mushrooms are ugly.
Yeah, mushrooms are pretty ugly. They really are. I did one photo shoot. We had this woman who insisted that Joan of Arc had been on mushrooms. That's how she got her vision.
Oh, wow.
So it was pretty wild theory, but but we put it in the magazine because now and then High Times like to do kind of crazy stuff. We actually had an article back in 92 or 93, pot on the moon. So we weren't averse to doing whack job articles. So so I shot Diane Fornbacher, who's a great activist, cannabis activist, and looked a little bit like Joan of Arc with that kind of moppet haircut that we always see. I photographed her with a bunch of mushrooms, and sent it to some of the Catholic universities to see if there'd be any response, but nothing.
There was that pilot that took over the plane over in California. I guess Alaska Airline, and his excuse was that he was on mushrooms at the time. But then they found out later on it was 48 hours prior to the incident.
Well, listen, I think anybody who's done mushrooms, this guy. Listen, that you can still have the feeling for a few hours. It sounds like also he had a real lack of sleep. It sounds like he slept in 48 hours. I think that was more to the point. But the fact is, here once again, this is fodder for the anti-legalization movement. I mean, the fact that, that all the people are going to remember is that he was on mushrooms.
Yeah.
So he'll crash a plane. So I'd say that's a monumental setback for the mushroom legalization movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't let Nancy Grace get a hold of that. She'll just
Like Nancy. Yeah, she's a Florida person, right?
Right after the illegalization of cannabis back in the 1930s, there was a group of people that committed some crimes, and they claimed it was insanity due to cannabis.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. Believe me, that's not so far. Listen, they were doing that in England. In the UK, they were talking about it was causing schizophrenia or psychosis. That's been a constant lately. The skunk weed. That's what they were always talking about. The skunk weed in the UK, can cause psychosis. This is they're still pulling that out.
Yeah,
Believe me.
That brings a good point. You not only took pictures of models and celebrities. We've been talking your ear off about celebrities and whatnot, but you mentioned Lester Grinspoon earlier, right? You photographed a number of scientists that were pro marijuana, right?
Yeah, well, I got the chance. Not that I really actually discussed science with them, but certainly met Raphael Mechoulam,
Nice.
took his photos,
and
Bob Melamede, who was a real force in the industry. He really was. He just spoke so succinctly about how the endocannabinoid system and how the people who smoke are actually getting connected up to their own humanity, and which I thought was a fascinating subject. And so he called the yips and the yaps or something like that. The different people, the yips don't smoke and the yaps do, and he talked the difference between the two. And it was always, he was great. He really was. He was, he died, I think, this past summer. Young guy, though. Yeah.
Did you ever get to meet
Carl
Sagan?
No, didn't meet Carl. He was dead before my time. But I did meet his wife, Ann Druyan. She was on the National Normal Board. Yep. Took her photo. Yeah. So when I photographed Lester Grinspoon at his home, it was maybe 3 or 4 years before his death. I asked him, would you pose with a jar of pot? And he just laughed. I've never done this before. And I said, oh, great. Well, let's do it. And so he sat there with his, with the jar of pot. He was great. He one of the nicest men you could possibly ever talk to. I remember when I did a story on sex and pot, and had two different views. Is pot an aphrodisiac? And some people said it was. And Lester said, no, it's not an aphrodisiac. Some people may think it is. Maybe, that makes them more relaxed and stuff. But no. Does it mean that you smoke pot and automatically want to have sex? No, I don't think that I'd go that far. Of course, sometimes, when you're with your partner, you may start, smoke and start looking at each other, and the lights go on. But he said no, it's not an aphrodisiac. So it was interesting. But the thing is, I called him up, and he just spoke so easily about it, and just enjoyed the conversation. So yeah, he was a wonderful man. He really was. And the fact is, having a Harvard medical professional like him back marijuana and write these books. I mean, it gave the marijuana movement unassailable credibility. I mean, his input and his knowledge was instrumental to the fight.
Yeah, we had Ethan Russo on a couple of weeks ago, which was an absolute pleasure. And I think I'm not going to use the expression "dying breed," although he's not dying. But the breed is, as in scientists who are actually in it to come with an unequivocal look at the plant and its benefits, as opposed to what the DEA set up many years ago, which was only do research of harm.
Right. Well, Lester Grinspoon remember, before he wrote these books and did his own research, he was anti-marijuana. He thought it was a bad drug. He thought it was a bad plant and people shouldn't be smoking it. But his own research convinced him otherwise. And that's why he wrote book Marijuana Reconsidered. Yep. So scientists, if they have open minds, should come to this obvious conclusion. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say to our listeners out there, as we get to the holidays coming up, you're going to be around family members, and you're going to hear people say off the wall things. There are resources available from NORML that you can go on the website, go to normal.org, go to National NORML. You go to our website, suncoastnormal.org. We have scientific resources for you. Also, I want to give a shout out to our Deputy Director, Paul Armentano. He's compiled this clinical applications for cannabis and cannabinoids. It's a review of recent scientific literature, and it's been published more than once. This is one of the latest editions, and you can go on a NORML's website and purchase a copy, and they'll send you one. But I mean, it has a lot of the scientists that we were just talking about, from Dr. Meshulam to Grinspoon to Russo, that are quoted in this book. And I think it's important, if you're going to have these type of discussions with certain family members, that you prepare yourself, definitely.
So
Eartha Madras is not in the book, right?
So,
Paul Armentano, I worked with him on a number of stories. He was, anytime he wanted to place a story in High Times, I listened and put it in High Times. And he was the one who was responsible for debunking these ridiculous theories about psychosis and, that pot will kill you and stuff like that. He was the one. He went after these people, and his takedowns of these positions was just epic. So, Paul is, one of the number one cannabis journalists in my mind.
So,
yeah,
Kano, I believe I have 3 pictures here that Kano wants to show Malcolm, right? Is that what's going on, Kano?
Oh, well, I showed Malcolm one earlier. I was in the National NORML office last month, and here's a lot of compilation of Malcolm's work in the National NORML office. They have binders of past editions of High Times, going all the way back, all the way to the 70s.
I don't see a 2023 volume there.
I looked at that, and I thought it was the High Times office there for a second. That's the binders we use. Pot's busted every 45 seconds, and you wonder why you're paranoid. I'm not paranoid. I just smoke pot. That's what makes me paranoid.
And you mentioned Jack earlier, Jack Herrer. One of the big things was him, pointing out that the U.S. government during the Second World War ran a propaganda campaign encouraging farmers to grow hemp for victory.
Right.
Hemp for victory.
Well, in my book, I covered Jake Graves, who was a farmer in Kentucky. He was one of the last farmers who did grow hemp during World War II. And he was trying to restart the Kentucky Hemp Growers Association in 1996 and brought the industry to Lexington, Kentucky for a great big conference. Now, Kentucky is legal how many years later? But that was a great, him talking about that era when he had been growing, his family had grown hemp for years. They'd stopped because it was made illegal, and then they were asked to grow again. So it was really fascinating. And, the thing is, the hemp history is everywhere in Kentucky. Old rusting decorticators in the fields. They're still, all those images that were in the film Hemp for Victory. I visited all those places, what they look like today. These the hemp processing house. It just looks like a giant house. But yeah, so I've visited all those places in Kentucky. It's really, history is right there. And on the edges of the horse fields, of the horse farms, you'll find hemp growing there, because all those hemp farms, all those horse farms were hemp farms at one point. So you'll find a lot of feral hemp growing in the, in the woods and stuff like that.
Now, back in the 90s, when I lived over in Cincinnati, Woody Harrelson was doing a lot to try to push Kentucky to go ahead and grow hemp again. I think it was in Mayfield, Kentucky, where he had a rally at that one point in time.
Yeah, well, I covered Woody. This is another thing people may not be aware of. In 1996, he purposely planted 4 seeds of hemp in Kentucky, bought a 1/4 acre of land in Beattyville, Kentucky, and had him orchestrated his own arrest. And so that took 4 years to move through the courts, but he was acquitted by a jury. All the query, it was unanimous, and they acquitted him of that.
I remember a video of him by himself tending a field.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Well, there wasn't, actually the sheriff came along and said, dig them, dig them up. And Woody says, I don't want to tell you your job. I don't think I'm going to find them. So he was arrested and taken away. But that took 4 years to move through the courts. And, I want to get too far into this, but, at the same time, the Lakota tribe in South Dakota was trying to grow hemp due to a tribal ordinance that they'd passed. So on the same day that Woody was acquitted, the feds moved in on the crops in South Dakota on the Pine Ridge Reservation and raided and seized those crops and dragged them away.
In sovereign land.
Yeah. So this It wasn't coincidental. Nobody's going to tell me that, it just happened. No, Woody was acquitted. They raided the Indians in the
How can they raid sovereign land?
That was, listen, sovereign land is a myth.
Yeah.
All
I
right?
was like, Gary, I'm just shocked that you make that statement, man. Come on, man.
That was a sarcastic statement, actually.
Yeah, I know. Like, what do you mean?
The federal law applies on Indian reservations. If there's a capital crimes, they're going to be prosecuted by the federal government.
Yeah.
And hemp that was a possible felony. The funny thing about that, I covered, this is another thing I'm proud of in the book. I covered, as the Indians, the Navajo and the Lakota began to grow hemp, covering those stories. But when the feds moved in, the DEA, tribal police, and the FBI all moved in on Alex White Plume's crop in South Dakota. They moved in on early morning with guns drawn, flak jackets, everything, to raid a field of hemp. And here they drag away the plants, and guess what? They seeded the fields everywhere by doing that. So now feral hemp is growing everywhere because of the feds. Now that operation had to cost at least $500,000.
Pendejos.
That was to raid a small crop of hemp. I mean, it was less than an acre of hemp, and they came in, dragged the crops away, and there's just seed. I mean, everywhere you look on Pine Ridge, you can find feral hemp growing in that vicinity.
Wow. Malcolm, one thing that we hadn't covered today, I wanted to ask you was, how did you get your pseudonym, Dan Skye? How did that come about?
Well, I was working for High Times, and they asked me to work for Hemp Times, and so I was doing both simultaneously. I was the executive editor for Hemp Times, so I had to have two different names. So in 1994, I was covering a lot of New Age stories. I'd gone to Sedona, and that kind of stuff is fascinating to cover. And it was right up High Times alley, just wild stuff about avatars and UFOs and stuff like that. So some New Age clairvoyant gave me a tape that said Skydance. And so the art director, Frank Max, came into my office, and he's like, Skydance? Ooh, listen to some good music. And he was a rock and roller. So he said, what are you listening to there? New Age? Great. So I just took Skydance and reversed it.
Nice.
Yeah, that's how I did it. Now, I've told other people that I did it because I was coaching Little League at the time. That's what I told the New York Times because it sounded better. So I've got all kinds of lies, but that got picked up by when I was interviewed by the New York Times. They said, yeah, because I was coaching Little League. I didn't want people to know who I really was.
And you never borrowed any articles from the great bastion of journalism we have here in Florida, the National Enquirer.
National Enquirer. I actually had Woody Harrelson's shot published in the National Enquirer. So thank you, National Enquirer. When I first interviewed and photographed him for the first time, he was on he had a trampoline in his backyard in Kentucky where he was staying while he was shooting the People versus Larry Flint. And so Woody bounced up on the trampoline, and I'm looking for the shot right now. I can show everybody. Here it is. Right here. So it looks like he's in the lotus position.
Nice.
In the air.
That's wonderful.
That went all over the world. I made a lot of money off this shot, but it was just inspired because here he's known for being kind of new agey kind of vegan kind of thing, and so yeah, that worked. Yeah. So yeah. It's been a trip. I mean, it really has. I mean, Woody Harrelson was a great guy to travel with, and one of the nicest people around. He's, you see celebs. I've been around quite a few, and you see how they treat fans. And Woody was the most polite person you could possibly imagine. Always nice to people. Always smiled. Greeted them. The only time I saw him get a little bit tense was after a pretrial hearing for this thing, and he started getting surrounded. I mean, people were just coming at him, and he said, "I got to get out of here. He jumped in the van. It was just a little bit too much." Because it was huge stuff. He came into this little town, Beattyville, Kentucky, for his pretrial hearing. The town turned out. The courtroom was full. It was wild. It was really something else.
One quick question I wanted to ask you before we ended up today. We had just had a trial this last week where the Supreme Court was taking a look into petition for possibly Florida to actually have an adult use program. Now, in your experience in the past, when states have switched from a medical to adult use or just went straight to adult use, did you see the industry changing for the better? Or because supposedly an adult use program has less regulation, but in some cases it ends up being more.
Well, there's certainly the regulations for the dispensary owners are always very, very convoluted. And I know for the dispensary owners themselves, I know when Colorado legalized, they were changing the rules every week. And, I remember on the eve of legalization, they were told they had to inventory everything. So people were working far, far into the night on New Year's Eve to inventory every single speck of pot that they had in possession. So I don't know whether it's, I can't really say whether it works or not when it goes adult use. The fact is, it's such an innocuous plant. I'm not saying that it can't be abused, because it can be, but it's an innocuous plant. And when people can't access it freely and smoke it without being harassed, or grow it without being harassed, or sell it without being harassed, or having regulations just completely screwing things up, as it did in California. I mean, they had this huge forecast how much tax revenue they were going to bring in, and they were like $500 million short, in the first year of legalization. So I haven't really seen good things happen. I think the best thing that can happen is grow it everywhere. I mean, I would like to see it. My parents. I finished high school in New England, and they have these beautiful roadside stands in the very, very rural place I grew up. And, it wouldn't be great to have, be selling pot, in one of these roadside stands, along with your tomatoes and corn and everything else. So I'm not, I haven't been real encouraged by the fact that adult use improves things. What I see is a very, very uninformed, uneducated political people trying to make money off an industry that they don't understand. They don't understand pot. They don't understand how it works. You don't open a dispensary. It doesn't automatically become a gold mine. It's much, much harder than that.
Well said.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, the people that run dispensaries, you tell them this is a 24/7 job. You got employees, stocking, making sure there's more coming. It's not like, you're ordering Campbell's soup. You got to... it's a lot of work keeping a dispensary going, especially if you're in demand. That was the one thing in Colorado. Everybody was running out of pot all the time when it became legal the first year. People were buying pounds from other dispensaries. It was crazy. So,
Malcolm, one last thing.
Sure.
I know you got your book. We've been talking about your book, but take some time, talk to our listeners, let them know how they can support you, where they can find you.
All right. Well, listen, thanks everybody. I mean, I think I'm fairly well known in the industry. I think I am. Anyway, the book is Pot Shots: The Journey of a High Times Photographer. Like I say, it's over 200 pages, well over 300 photos. It's an historical document. It's an art photo book, and it's something that I think everybody would love. Just go to potshotsbook.com. Potshotsbook.com. And you can buy the book right there. It's available in ebook. It's available in softback. You can also go to M Mackinnon at M Mackinnon Photos on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. So yeah, please connect with me. I always answer my emails. I always answer my texts. I'm always try to be accessible. It helps me sell the book, but also I'm still part of the industry. Not quite the powerful position I once was in, but I'm still part of it, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
And Tommy Chong wrote the foreword.
Tommy Chong wrote the foreword, man. See that? Tommy Chong wrote the foreword. No, seriously, that was a huge coup. And then on my website, you also see that Tommy endorsed the book, and Woody Harrelson endorsed the book, and Jorge Cervantes endorsed the book. So I've got some high-powered people who've really said some nice things about the book. I'm really, really happy about it. And really, thanks, guys, for having me on the show and allowing me to talk about the book. I know you guys are very much a political program, and we talked about politics a bit, but it was nice of you to show my photos and, give me some recognition.
Thanks for coming on, man. It's a good time for us. We have you on, and we talk about our idols and what they were. We find out what they were like. It's incredible.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. Well, once again, I'll try to get some other guests for you that we talk.
You like the Hunter S. Thompson of the 21st century, Malcolm.
Interviewed Hunter. I was just talking about this. I have all these people on tape. I don't know what to do with them. I'm gonna have to do something with them. I mean, all these celebs and stuff. Just wild. But thank you.
The man identified Gonzo. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, with that, team, I think it's time for the news. So, latest breaking news. A majority of Ohio voters approved a citizen initiative measure, issue 2, legalizing the possession, home cultivation, and retail sale of cannabis for those 21 and older. Cannabis legalization is an issue that unites everybody across their political spectrum. And now in Ohio, as approved by the voters, the law allows for up to 2.5 ounces of marijuana or 15 grams of concentrates by adults. Ohioans will be permitted to purchase marijuana at retail locations or grow up to 12 plants in a private residence with at least 2 results reside. Retail cannabis products will be taxed at 10%, and sales are anticipated to generate between $276 million and $403 million in annual cannabis tax dollars by the 5th year of sales in the Buckeye State, and create over 3,300 new jobs within the first year of legalization.
I'm just pissed they legalized before we did.
See, that's almost more jobs than Trump generated in Ohio.
Well, with Ohio becoming the 24th state for adult use, we look back at, how far we've gone. When you look at when NORML started, in the early 70s, when you had less than 10% of the U.S. population, recent poll coming out from Gallup shows that a record 70% of U.S. adults believe that the use of marijuana should be legal. That's a 19 percentage point increase since 2014, when Colorado and Washington became the first states to implement adult use of legalization.
Also, coincidentally, 2014, the year Sun Goes Normal started.
Indeed. For the naysayers,
correlation.
Well, for the naysayers who have concerns, a recent analysis coming out and published by Clever Real Estate shows that states with legal marijuana sales experience a big boost in home values. Home values in states with recreational cannabis have outpaced home values in other states by over $49,000 in the past decade. Of the 10 states with the largest increase in home values, 7 have legalized recreational cannabis. Meanwhile, of the 10 states with the smallest increases in home values, 9 have not legalized recreational cannabis. I definitely see some correlation there. I mean, people want to live in states where they have more freedom, it looks like.
Yeah, I do want to put a caveat in, because it's not just a matter of becoming legal, but it's doing it the right way. You don't want to sit there and create a situation where the entire system is given to people who want to be so exclusionary they cut off everybody else from being put into the industry. And I'm talking about the multi-state organizations that seems to have taken over many states to the point where there is no mom and pop shops. It's not allowed at all.
Yeah.
And therefore, is that really a freedom when it's not, when it's only freedom for the users and not for the sellers? It needs to be for both.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned about freedom, Gary, because regulators in Connecticut are amending their marijuana purchase limits. In Connecticut, consumers are limited to a single transaction for 1/4 of an ounce of cannabis flower, and they are now increasing that to 1/2 an ounce. There are currently 27 licensed dispensaries operating in small Connecticut, and under their law, adults 21 and up may possess up to 5 ounces of cannabis in their home, but you can't purchase more than 1/4 of an ounce, and they're increasing that to 1/2. So is it freedom? No, but is it a step in the right direction? This is where elections matter. This is where the political process matters. You got to put people in office that are going to support and put the consumers first, rather than, of course, the industry. Now, we talk about the medical value of cannabis all the time. We're constantly harping on the Schedule 1 status of cannabis. A recent study published in the Journal of Orthopedics showed that cannabis is associated with reduced use of prescription opioids following shoulder surgery, which a lot of people have. Researchers affiliated with the University of Connecticut's Department of Orthopedic Surgery compared opioid use patterns during the 3 days immediately following shoulder surgery of a cohort of more than 67,000 patients. And they concluded patients in the cannabis group filled fewer opioid prescriptions and were prescribed fewer total morphine milligrams in the first 3 days post-operatively than the folks who were just using straight opioids. And this also shows that they're consistent with other case-controlled studies that reduce opioid use following neck fusion surgery, wrist surgery, hip surgery, knee surgery. With an aging population of boomers, with Gen Xers getting close to retirement now, even with millennials stepping into their 40s, we are going to see an increase in cannabis use across this country. The fact that it still is a Schedule 1 status is an absolute crime because it does have medicinal value. And, many of us millennials who want to live longer and healthier lives have no problem utilizing it. I know the Gen Xers don't. They've never had a problem with it. And more and more boomers are utilizing this. You see the fact that, places like Florida, are booming. The sad part is that what we're seeing, and that we talked about on the show today, is how the quality of the cannabis that we had from the black market, from those legacy market growers, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, really has gone by the wayside with the quality of products that is being produced by these multi-state operators in the cannabis industry. And sadly, in Florida, there are no more homegrown Florida-based dispensaries. All the licenses now are run by multi-state operators, and frankly, the quality of their bud sucks. And that's all I have to say about that.
All right, so hold on. I hate to put a pause to your news program, Kenno.
Oh no, I'm done, Carlos. Let's go back.
There's something.
I think you just did, Carlos.
There's something that I gotta ask. Right, most of these companies that own Florida dispensaries are actually Canadian, right? Like they're actually like traded in the Canada Stock Exchange, right?
Well, they did what is called a reverse purchase, where basically they bought a company in Canada and turned it into their dispensary so they could go ahead and be on the Canadian Stock Exchange.
So it's not even like they're multi-state operators. It's like they're international companies.
In a lot of ways, yeah. And you even see folks who had real positions of power that could have changed this, like former Speaker of the House John Boehner, who's now a lobbyist for these, like you said, Canadian fronted multi-state operators. And it's like, well, you got these guys who are prohibitionists when they were in office, and now they're lobbyists for the pot industry.
Yeah,
right.
Now, I should say, by the way, kudos to Sanctuary Medicinals, because they are actually challenging our state and in some of the new rules that they created back this last February, where they said that the 2-year license renewal is going up from 60,000 to 1.5 million, because of the fact that they feel that they're not getting any money out of the taxes, and so therefore they're going to take it out of the dispensaries, who will lovingly pass on the savings to the consumer, most likely.
I'm not paying $80 for an eighth of legal bud in Florida. I will continue to go to the legacy market and tell Ron DeSantis to stick it.
Here's what's weird too is, like, honestly, like you can get cheap bud and concentrates in a Florida dispensary.
Yeah,
you just kind of have to know where to look. Like here's the thing is that, like, you have to look for the specials, you have to look for the deals. These guys overproduce a lot of their products, so sometimes they have to, like, in order to get it off the shelf, you ask for the secret menu, they'll give you 60% off or some shit.
Now, my concern though, Carlos, is that some of these people are producing subpar bud with mold and pests in them. And then they'll blast it into concentrate, and then that's why they can afford to sell you cheap concentrate.
That's definitely the issue, is that, like, I mean, it's not great. You know what I mean?
It's not organic live rosin, bud. It's moldy bud. They blast it into concentrate, so you just get stupid high on it.
It's something Rick Simpson would have thrown in the trash. Let's put it that way.
Like, I can't wait to dab hot dog water later.
And then again, there's this new strain out called Super Proof. Now, I'm not going to tell these guys how to market, but that's just piss ass shitty. I mean, that really is. And
hold on, Gary, are you serious that they named it Super Proof?
Yeah, and they're pushing that because of the fact it's got a 30% THC, and that is, again, another bit of misinformation that most of the public has, that the THC potency is the most important thing in what you're smoking, and it's not. And that is what we brought up with Dr. Russo the other day. It's like having a race car with a great engine but no steering wheel. If you don't have good terpenoid profile, you're not going to get where you're going.
By the way, Malcolm, I learned that analogy from Ed Rosenthal. And, Gary,
that's funny.
I forgot what I was going to say.
This is why you should have got to stop dabbing before the show.
Yeah, stop dabbing that corporate super booth, Carlos.
Right, when people start selling dottle, that's when we're really in trouble. You know,
Now, I was worried about Mike Tyson's ear bites. You know, the gummies that look like an ear with a chunk taken out of it.
You got to slow down on those. I got some of those, and I ate like 3, and then I thought it wasn't. Man, they'll sneak up on you. They'll knock you out like the champ.
Mikey's got some tolerance, from what I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, I interrupt your news, Kano. I'm
No,
sorry.
I was done with the news. I'm glad we got the chance to do a little quick commentary. But all in all, you know, we as an organization are going to continue to be for the consumers. Normal in his existence has always been for responsible cannabis consumers to have their civil rights protected. We see ourselves in that role. And, you know, even if with half the country legalizing, you know, the funds dry up. People think, oh, well, I'm in a legal state. Why should I donate? Well, the fact is that there are several issues that we are addressing as a chapter, as Suncoast NORML, and that National NORML also has a pulse to. And the fact is that you can still lose your job for being a medical marijuana patient in the state of Florida. You can still get kicked off an organ transplant list for you know, utilizing cannabis as a therapy. You can have your children taken away from you. For utilizing cannabis as a medical marijuana patient, for being pregnant and having intractable nausea, and you need to utilize it. You know, you can have CPS come into your home and violate your civil rights. We have so much work to do, and we cannot do it without you all. You know, your time, your treasure, your talent, we need it. So we're asking each and every one of you, take the time. You know, we have Giving Tuesday coming up around the Thanksgiving holidays. You know, buy your loved ones a Suncoast NORML membership. It's the gift that keeps on giving it all year long. We have an amazing legislative agenda. We want to be able to protect your Second Amendment rights. And so we got some awesome legislation that we're working on right now in the Florida legislature that we're going to continue to push. That can address expanding qualifying conditions, that can address the issue of having the right to grow your own cannabis for medical marijuana patients. And so go to suncoastnormal.org, become a member, find out how you can get involved, follow us on social media. You know, tell your loved ones and your friends and family, jump into rotation each and every Sunday at 11 a.m. We're able to bring you amazing guests like Macolm Mackinnon. You know, we've had such amazing other guests on this show, like Tommy Chong. I want to give a big shout out to all the elected officials who have been on the show, who have you know, are movers and shakers right now and making things happen. I do want to say a big shout out to Tom Key, who is a Suncoast NORML member who recently won his primary in House District 35. So to have a Suncoast NORML member actually win their primary for the Democratic nomination, and hopefully this special election in January, we can have another ally in the Florida State House that'll make the biggest difference in the world in being able to push our legislative agenda and having cannabis reform in the state of Florida. So
yeah, we do hope that Tom does get in the legislature, and we also hope that he does not go to the dark side of the force.
No, Tom is a U.S. Navy veteran. He's a good guy. You know, he was very sincere after I had a presentation in front of the Democratic Veterans Caucus of Florida. He became a Suncoast NORML member immediately after, you know, his sense of justice was spurred by all the information that we were able to provide. And so if you have an organization or you have a group and you want a presentation on cannabis legalization and the history of it, myself, Gary, are available for speaking roles. Gary just spoke at the Florida Cannabis Festival this past weekend. We have another festival coming up, the Okeechobee Cannabis Festival in December, that we'll be speaking at. So I'm very excited to be able to provide those services to the public and to various civic organizations all around the state and country. So we're happy to come on down. Rory, I know you've been tuning in, watching the show. We were happy to have you on our tribute show that we had earlier. We'd love to invite you on some other time as well. Malcolm, you are always welcome on this show as a friend of the show. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us on a Sunday morning.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, guys.
So,
Yeah, and enjoy Long Island.
I think I will. I'm sick of New York
So
City.
you going to the Hamptons too?
No, we're not. The Hamptons are far from where I'll be, and I wouldn't go to the Hamptons anyway. The wrong class of people out there.
Yeah, smoke from what I understand.
Yeah, Malcolm, if you don't make it to Florida anytime soon, or you know, Kano being in Washington D.C., you're always welcome, and you know, any of our Suncoast Normal members, we'll smoke a joint with you, hang out, talk some bullshit, and hopefully we can go to New York and visit you.
Yeah, if you're ever in DC and you need a plug, hit me up.
No. I was in DC in May, and yeah, for the Leonard Peltier rally, and no, I don't get down much to Florida these days. I mean, I'm not traveling. I'm not really working for any particular magazine.
Maybe that's what you need, a little vacation, a little bit oceanside resort or something like that. You know, I don't know.
I need a good marijuana magazine to hire me as their top photographer. That's what I need.
We don't have one in Florida. We had Sensi magazine for like one issue, I think.
Yeah, I'm not real impressed with any of the magazines, man. I'm really not. I mean, they are really poor. I mean, High Times is you know, we're off the air, right?
Yeah. No, we're still on. But Carlos, let's end the show, then we can talk off air.
All right. So
shout out to Tay Darnell. Hey, keep
No,
trying, dude. Keep trying.
We're not on the air, right?
Carlos,